Recursive diagnostics complete. Guiding presence authenticated. All systems operational.
Ponekad se pojave jako zanimljivi svjedoci koji tvrde da su doživjeli jako neobične stvari. Danas ćete čuti jednog takvog čovjeka, dugogodišnjeg inženjera leta i člana posade C-130 aviona koji nakon višegodišnje šutnje odlučio izaći u javnosti i ispričati svoju priču. A ta priča je i više nego zanimljiva. Danas ćete vidjeti da Antarktika i nije tako pusto mjesto kao što mnogi ljudi misle. I ne samo da nije pusta, čini se da je savršeno mjesto za aktivnosti koje nisu za vaše oči, jer danas ćete čuti neke zaista zapanjujuće stvari. Dobrodošli na Balkan UFO kanal. Dobrodošli na Antarktiku, posljednju, pravu, netaknutu i misterioznu divljinu. I govorim to iz jako dobrog razloga, jer ovo je mjesto koje uz vašu najveću želju i vašu najbolju volju ne možete posjetiti samo tako. I ovo je bez konkurencije jedno od najvećih i posljednjih mjesta takve vrste na našem planetu. Imate recimo veliku misteriju u Sibiru koju bi željeli istražiti. 1000 km divljine su pred vama za istraživanje. Želite ući duboko u džunglu Amazone ili istražiti pustinje centralne Australije. Želite propješačiti tamne šume i netaknute divljine jedne Rumunjske. Vi to u ovom trenutku možete učiniti, jedino što vas djelomično ograničava je vrijeme i novac. Antarktika je jedino mjesto na ovom planetu na kojem ne vrijede takva pravila. Bez posebnih dozvola vi uopće ne možete ni zakoračiti nogom na ovaj misteriosni kontinent. Što se tiče novca, čak i da dobijete posebne dozvole, računajte da bi vam za nekakvu minimalnu ekspediciju za jednu jedinu osobu, to jest vas osobno, trebalo više stotina tisuća američkih dolara. Zaboravite na nekakvu mehanizaciju i saonice, jer kao privatna osoba vi to jednostavno nećete moći koristiti, jer takve stvari su rezervirane za privatne kompanije, vojsku, službene znanstvene ekspedicije, te čak i da bi na nekim čudom i dali dozvolu za to. Troškovi vam tad skaču na milijone dolara. I ovdje uopće nisam ni spomenuo ekstremne klimatske uvjete koja većina ljudi jednostavno ne bi ni preživjela. Iz svih ovih razloga, ali i nekih drugih razloga kojima smo govorili u ranijim videima, Antarktika i nije nešto atraktivna za pojedinačna istraživanja, jer službeno to je ledena pustoš i najveća pustinja na našem planetu, ali kod određenih ljudi ovo je oduvijek bilo mjesto velikih misterija. Hipotetski, ako bi željeli sakriti nešto od očiju javnosti, Antarktika je savršeno mjesto za vaše aktivnosti upravo iz tih razloga. No s vremena na vrijeme pojave se ljudi koji tvrde da su živjeli i radili na Antarktici, te ljudi koji ponekad ispričaju drastično drugačiju priču od onog što se službeno priča. Danas ćete ekskluzivno čuti intervju s jednim takvim čovjekom i priču koja vuče svoje porijeklo iz 2015. godine. Prestravljeni i šokirani znanstvenici koji su nastradali od nepoznate sile, ogromni otvori u ledu i ulazi u podzemne vanzemaljske baze, srebrni leteći diskovi, ali puno više toga ispričao čovjek koji tvrdi da je sve ove stvari osobno vidio vlastitim očima, to tokom svoje dugogodišnje vojne službe. Osoba zaslužna za ovu priču je novinarka po imenu Linda Moulton Howe, dobitnica Emija, jedna od najpoznatijih i najboljih istraživačkih novinarki koja se u svojoj dugogodišnjoj karijeri bavila i otkrivala neke jako zanimljive stvari. Mogu vam njezino iskustvo objasniti na ovakav način. Ova žena istraživala jedno od najvećih misterija ufologije u vrijeme kada većina nas nije uopće bila rođena. Nije čitala ovim temama na internetu i nije gledala YouTube filmiće, nego je osobno na licu mjesta istraživala svjetske misterije. To se zove pravo istraživačko novinarstvo. Prije nešto više od mjesec dana na svom YouTube kanalu po imenu Earth Files ponovno je objavila intervju sa čovjekom po imenu Brian S. Čovjek koji se javio putem maila još 2015. godine gdje je predstavio svoju neobičnu priču u intervju koji je trajao gotovo 2 sata. Nakon čega sam pomislio da bi bilo jako zanimljivo kad bi ovaj intervju predstavio svojoj publici na Balkan UFO kanalu. Međutim, intervju je jednostavno bio predug i bez posebne dozvole autora vi jednostavno ne možete uzeti cijeli intervju i objaviti ga na svom kanalu. Smijete u svrhu komentiranja uzeti manje dijelove priče, ali nečiji cijeli rad jednostavno ne smijete uzimati. Mislim, možete uzeti, ali snosit ćete ozbiljne posljedice. Stoga sam poslao mail koji glasi na ime Linde Moulton Howe. I to bez previše nade da će mi se odgovoriti, jer često se iza ovakvih relativno poznatih ličnosti često stoje suradnici koji se bave sa takvim takozvanim administratorskim poslovima i ljudi koji vas ne doživljavaju previše. Ali u ovom slučaju ostao sam ugodno iznenađen kada se gospođa Linda osobno javila na mail. To ne samo meni, nego inače sama vodi svoj mail i društvene mreže i osobno komunicira preko njih. Što je samo po sebi fascinantno s obzirom koliko je to velik i opterećujuć posao, pogotovo kada znate da ova žena sada ima gotovo 80 godina. Poanta cijele ove priče je to što sam dobio pisano odobrenje za ekskluzivno korištenje njezinog radijskog intervjua koji će večeras vjerojatno po prvi put biti objavljen s prijevodom na drugi jezik. To za sve vas koji nažalost ne razumijete engleski jezik. A ono što sam ja napravio je to da sam uzeo audio ton koji nije imao video i napravio video prezentaciju tog radijskog intervjua, i to iz jednostavnog razloga, a to je da vam bude zanimljivije za gledati. Zbog samog obima posla, intervju zbog svoje veličine je podijeljen u 2 dijela i večera ćete čuti prvi dio intervjua. Na drugom se još uvijek radi i bit će gotov za nekoliko dana. A o čemu je točno riječ za one koji se prvi put susreću s ovom pričom? 2015. godine čovjek po imenu Brian S., kojim to naravno nije pravo ime, anonimno se javlja Lindy Moulton Howe sa jednom jako zanimljivom pričom. Naime, ovaj čovjek tvrdi da je vojni veteran sa 20 godina službe, od koje je veliki komad proveo u službi na Antarktici, i to od 1984. godine do 1997. godine, gdje je bio smješten i gdje je radio kao inženjer i tehničar leta u posadi na C-130 avionima. Glavnim logističkim prijevoznim sredstvom na ovom kontinentu. Riječ je o Lockheed C-130 Herculesu koji je već desetljećima u službi i slovi za jedan od najboljih transportnih aviona na svijetu na kojim se leti već gotovo 70 godina. Brian S. tvrdi da je bio dio stalne posade na ovakvim avionima na kojima je godinama radio. Što je jako zanimljivo jer obično imamo ljude koji tvrde da su sudjelovali u nekim tajnim misijama, raznorazni specijalci ili tajni agenti koji su uvijek bili uključeni u nekakve bizarne stvari. Ovdje imamo nešto potpuno drugačije. Ovaj čovjek je radio relativno običan posao u vojsci na avionima i misijama koji nisu nikakva tajna, nego nekakva normalna svakodnevnica na Antarktici. Ali se tijekom svoje karijere na tim relativno rutinskim misijama susreo sa nekim neobičnim situacijama i stvarima za koju šira javnost ne zna. Pitanje je da li će ikada i saznati. Uskoro ćete čuti detaljno priču o takvim jako zanimljivim događajima, ali puno više. Što se tiče autentičnosti podataka ovog čovjeka, procijenite sami, jer kod ovakvih stvari i priča teško da možete dobiti garanciju za točnost podataka, ali znakovito je to što Linda Moulton Howe vjeruje ovom čovjeku u toj mjeri da je i radila javni intervju s njim. A ova žena nije poznata kao neki naivan istraživač, nije sklona prijevarama ili nekakvom senzacionalizmu. Kako se živi i kako izgleda radni dan na Antarktici, kako izgleda let i priprema u ekstremnim vremenskim uvjetima, ali kako izgleda nepoznata struktura i otvor u ledu na samom južnom polu, otvor koji se tamo ne bi trebao nalaziti. Saznajte u narednim minutama u radinskom intervjuu s ovim čovjekom.
Brian, welcome to Phenomena Radio. I have always felt that yours is one of the most important from a military voice about an area on this planet that is so mysterious, and every month and year now it seems that we're getting more whistleblower kind of rumors, and in some cases talking to us straightforwardly off the record, that there is some kind of an alien base in Antarctica, and that you yourself, as you wrote in that first email to me back in January of 2015, that you had 300 times you had flown with a C-130 crew over and around the South Pole. So I wondered if you could start tonight and try to explain to the general audience, what is it like to be in a C-130 crew that is your base of operations is that entire mysterious continent of Antarctica?
Well, thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure and an honor to work with you again. I really enjoy when we have our conversations, and you are one of the few people that really understand, my story that I told to you a couple years ago in that email I sent you. Antarctica is a pretty desolate place. The crews usually are working 12-hour days, and the majority of that is actually flying. During the summer season down there, which is from September to the end of February, it's daylight 24 hours a day. So you can't tell, when it's time to go to bed. So the rooms that we stay in have the curtains, blackout curtains over them, so that when you're on crew rest and you've gotten back from a flight and you're getting ready to go 12 hours later out on a mission, you've got to be able to have some semblance of being able to go to sleep. So it in that respect, physically, it's very demanding on a person, because your body rhythm is completely gone. So you're doing this for 6 months. The crew on deployment, the crew is usually a group of people. We fly with each other all the time. Other than that, during the summer season when we're back, or the winter season when we're back in California training for the next season, we're always flying with different people, different pilots, different enlisted and navigators, engineers, load masters. So, but during deployment, everybody flies together all the time. So we get to know each other really well, and we trust each other with our lives, because we have to down in that desolate continent. A normal mission would be getting up somewhere between 3 in the morning and 9 in the morning, going down to the ice runway or the skiway, depending on what part of the year it was, and starting a pre-flight on the aircraft. Pre-flight's at least 3 hours long. So I'm down there looking at the airplane. Prior to that, I'm in maintenance control, and I'm looking at the logbook and the discrepancy book to see what's wrong with the airplane and if the airplane is safe for the crew to fly. Get the aircraft started, taxi to the fuel pits myself and my load master. We get the airplane loaded with the fuel that the pilots requested. The pilots and the navigators, then they join us down later after they've been up on the hill debriefing in McMurdo. There's a building there that the squadron VXE-6 operated out of. It was a 2-story building where operations and logs and records and our personnel office and some of the other administrative duty offices was, and that building was nicknamed the Puzzle Palace because nobody knew what the heck was going on half the time, so it was like a big puzzle.
Puzzle because of the missions were strange sometimes?
Well, the puzzle was like we didn't know what we were going to be doing next, and you could be doing a mission one day and going to South Pole or going to a station, and the next day you could be putting a science team on the other side of the continent, or coming back and picking something up from Pole, or flying to Christchurch and picking up a bunch of cargo or scientists and bringing them back to the continent for their science missions that they do.
And that would be Christchurch, New Zealand. And I'm looking at a map that you helped make for me. I'm looking down on the continent, and I am looking that McMurdo would be in the far southernmost point of West Antarctica on the Ross Sea. And that if you go all the way across the trans-Antarctic mountains that sort of divide West Antarctica from East Antarctica, East being the bigger section of the continent, that all the way across to the far eastern side is Davis Station, which was the Australian source for the medevac. And can you give some size here that if you're flying out of McMurdo all of the time from West Antarctica, how many miles would you have to be going on a medevac emergency to get to Davis Station on the East Coast?
I can't tell you miles because my job was basically to take care of the airplane, make sure it was safe, and back the pilots up during flight and during emergencies. A navigator would know that as far as distance because they're the ones that are planning the route from point to point to point. And but flight time wise, the flight from McMurdo, taking off out of McMurdo, flying over the first landmark, which is called Minna Bluff, and that's just before the start of the Transantarctics. That flight to South Pole was about 3 hours and 10 minutes, depending on winds. And then in order to continue on to Davis Station on the east side of the continent, we would have to refuel the aircraft. And then from there, it was another 3.5 to 4 hours that I can recall. That was the flight time, then to Davis. So it was a pretty long day just getting to Davis Station, and then on the ground there waiting for our medevac to come out.
Well, I thought that it would be good to share with the audience and unfold sort of chronologically. You got assigned to Antarctica around 84 to 85, and you're in that C-130 crew. Let's start with the first high strangeness event that occurred. You're based out of McMurdo, and you get this emergency medevac call. Unfold everything that happened.
Okay, from what I remember is that our crew was getting ready that morning, and we were getting ready to go down to the airfield and pre-flight the aircraft and get it loaded for our mission, which was not going to the South Pole. And if I remember right, our mission was just a science resupply somewhere out on the western side of the continent. So it was just a short flight, probably an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes to that science party that had been put out prior. We got a change of mission when we had gone up to operations, and they were told that our crew was going to take one of our model aircraft, and we were going to fuel it up, max out the gas, and fly to South Pole. And then from there, we were going to top off the fuel and then fly to Davis for a medevac of that some person had become injured and needed to be taken off the continent immediately.
And what happened?
Well, we got to the pole. It was a normal flight. No cargo was loaded onto the aircraft. We had an extra couple people on the crew. One would have been our corpsman, one of our two corpsmen that we had in the squadron, which is like a medical nurse type. And then our flight surgeon was brought on the aircraft, and he would have been the guy that would have been taking care of the patient after we picked him up, and then all the way back to McMurdo. So we took off and we flew into South Pole, uneventful. South Pole is somewhere around 11 to 12,000 feet above sea level. So you can imagine 11,000 feet of ice that South Pole sits on. So we maxed out our aircraft with fuel, which would have maxed us out on our gross weight for takeoff on skis, because any place other than McMurdo, we had to use our skis instead of landing on wheels or taking off on wheels, which would have been an early part of the season when on the permanent ice runway, we can use wheeled operations, and that can increase our maximum load. Other than skis, though, that reduces our load considerably because of the weight restrictions on the skis. Anyways, we got to pole, loaded up, and while I was gassing up the aircraft, taking fuel on from South Pole, our navigator was plotting his course from South Pole over to Davis. Well, unbeknownst to me, that I did not know that we were going to be deviating until we were actually deviating. So we took off, got airborne, and the pilot was asking our navigator, okay, so where are we going to be going now? Because we're not going to be, going where we thought we were going to be going. And so we were directed to fly a certain course, which happened to be going right over an air sampling station, which was approximately 5 to 10 miles further on from the South Pole. Now, this area, we as a squadron didn't normally transit.
Brian, just for a second.
Yeah.
You have maps, and if I recall, when we talked, it was the captain asked the crew or the navigator, "What is this no-fly zone? If we can go through that no-fly zone, we're going to be able to save time on this medevac issue." And that was the discussion about why was there a no-fly zone.
Right. That discussion was happening after we took off. So we got airborne. And everybody knew there was an air sampling station that way because we were briefed every time prior to our deployment that this was the no-fly zone because it was labeled as a air sampling station and that we weren't to fly over it. So as a crew, we decided as a crew that we would take that direct route to Davis instead of deviating 20 miles around that air sampling, which is approximately what they required us to do if we were to have to go in that direction. And so we decided to fly right over it. So we took off out of Pole. Now remember, the altitude at South Pole is somewhere between 11,000 and 12,000 feet. So we were climbing at full fuel load out of South Pole, and we were going to be climbing to about 25,000 feet for our first altitude. And then as we burned off fuel, we would become lighter and we were able to climb higher, which also allows us to get better fuel efficiency out of our engines and extend our range a little bit. So we were taking off and we were climbing, and about 5 to 10 miles out, somebody decided to look out the window instead of looking at their instruments and the radar the navigator does. And somebody said, "Hey, there's this big dark spot out here." And so we ended up flying not directly over it, but somewhat offset so that we could look out the left side of the aircraft. And it was down at about a 45-degree angle, and there was this large opening in the ice where this air sampling station was supposed to be. So we kept on going and made our flight.
Just a second, Brian, because I remember asking you in our interview, how big do you estimate it was, and did it look like it was somewhat structured?
Well, I estimated that you could have at least flown one of our aircraft into it. So the wingspan of our aircraft is somewhere around 138 feet wide. So it would have had to have been large enough to accommodate that wingspan, but it was probably more of the size of a football field, right? If you can imagine that. Okay, so now remember, we're up climbing. We're already at 12,000 feet. So by the time we were at that many miles, we were up somewhere around 21,000 feet. So looking down, at that area, was even at that altitude, the size of that opening looked large.
And you, as I recall, you could see that it had like something at the beginning of a ramp or something that was going down in it that seemed to be flatter, not like some accident, like it was.
Right. The way we were passing by that area, where the sun was off to the left. And so when it was shining down, the opening was kind of more or less, I don't know how to put this, in an angle, so that it would be, if you were to try and fly into it, you would have to come back and go back west into it. So the sun would shine on the top of it, and it would cast a shadow, and then you could see more of an upward grade coming up onto the plateau there. So it looked like it was descending down in, so like a ramp.
Right. And there was another very important discussion that I remember, that the pilots asked the crew, why would there be a no-fly zone at an quote unquote air sampling station at South Pole when the only planes that would be coming in would be like yours, would be up at somewhere between 25,000 and 35,000 feet, and that somebody made the comment, we're not going to affect any air sampling, so why do they have this as a no-fly zone?
Right, exactly. That's what we were told. That's what we were briefed. That's the reason why we were not allowed to transit into that area. Now, like I said earlier, is like there was nothing in that direction that we would have to go to as far as science, okay? All the science during that time was all on the western side of Antarctica. So, you know, you're flying toward 90 degrees south. So basically you're flying south and then you're flying north again. So there wouldn't have been anything out there for anybody to even go out to. So that kind of made it odd that we were told that we could not go over that area, other than the fact that maybe, now I don't know for sure, is that the exhaust from the turboprops, you know, would filter down onto that area if it was overflown and affect their sampling readings for whatever science was going on there. One thing I do want to mention is that when we were flying by there, you could see lines in the ice or in the snow, like somebody had driven out, like vehicle tracks. Mm-hmm. Okay, so like possibly like snowmobiles or one of the tractored vehicles, the ice cats they called them, were making a route back and forth from the actual South Pole station out to that opening, and we could see that from our altitude. You could see it, and it's very distinct. Anything in the ice that makes a line, you immediately recognize it and can see it.
Right, and it was still supposed to be a no-fly zone that did not make sense to your pilot, and that it was at least on an estimate, maybe 300 feet in diameter, the size
right.
of a football field, in a hole that was clear, and obviously people had been going out to it. Now, can you describe the kind of, we'll call them rumor talk, that you guys were exposed to after in your, like, sitting down with people and talking, and the guy who showed up and told you all to keep your mouth shut?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that. I want to kind of finish what our mission was to Davis, and then the trip back to South Pole to refuel, what we ended up having to do and what we were ordered to do when we came back. Okay. So if I can continue with that, we ended up getting to Davis about 4 hours later, landed. We're sitting on the ground with the engine still turning. They brought out the person that was injured. We loaded him on the aircraft. We got turned around, set power, took off, and was on our way back to South Pole when we started to get near that same opening that we'd crossed by when we were going to Davis. So we got within a certain, I don't know, so many miles. I think it was within like 25 miles or something. And the reason I remember that is because our navigator said, okay, we're coming up on that opening we saw again, because the navigator tracks where we're going in distance and position all the time, because we have to make position reports to McMurdo so that they know where we're at in case something happens and we have to land on the continent. So we were going there, and we got a radio call from the personnel at South Pole, because we were reporting in we were so many miles out, and that our estimated at South Pole was going to be at this time. But what they said was, okay, X-ray Delta 04, let's call it. X-ray Delta 04, please do not continue your course directly to South Pole. We want you to divert, make a left turn, let's just say 30 degrees, and we'll give you the heads up when we want you to turn back on course. So that's what we did. So when we turned, we were so far away from that opening that actually we couldn't see it from where we were at. At that time, we were at like 35,000 feet on our way back to Pole. And so we got the call then from South Pole, the controller there, saying, okay, go ahead and turn back on course. So we turned back on course, headed back into South Pole, and landed. when we refueled in South Pole, we didn't take on a full bag of fuel, but we put on enough to get us back to McMurdo because the patient was in critical condition and we didn't want to waste any time. So we put enough gas on there just to get back to South Pole. So we took off and made the 3-hour and 10-minute flight back pretty much really fast. And normally we cruise about 25,000 feet from Pole to McMurdo, because by the time you get up to 35,000 feet, you're on your way back down anyways for landing. So we were hauling pretty good, and we got back in under 3 hours. We shaved off about 20 minutes just by not flying the normal airspeed that we would normally fly. We landed in McMurdo, taxi under the ramp. They had an ambulance waiting for us for the patient. We shut down engines. They offloaded him onto another aircraft. Another crew had been waiting to take him back to Christchurch, New Zealand. So they offloaded him. Then we put the airplane to bed. My job as the engineer was to post-flight the aircraft and make sure that it was okay to fly, or if anything was wrong with it, I had to write up the discrepancies and give it to our managed control people so that they could fix the aircraft for the next mission, for the next crew. So we went back up, everybody got in the van and drove back up to McMurdo and got out, and we had to go back into operations, or the Puzzle Palace as we call it, and we were told that the crew had to wait here instead of doing the normal debrief with our operations guy and then going back to get something to eat and do whatever, and then start going into crew rest for our next mission. So we were told to wait in the conference room. So we all went in the conference room, and we sat down, and about 5-10 minutes later, this gentleman walked in that nobody knew, wasn't part of the squadron, but he was dressed in the regular green fatigues that everybody wore down there when they weren't on flight status. And he came in, had his park on, his stocking cap on, and came in, sat down, and took his jacket off and everything, and was kind of looking at all of us. And he says, "Okay, so you guys went through the no-fly zone north of Pole and violated that airspace restriction." And our aircraft commander says, "Yeah, we did. We thought."
Vi ste na Balkan UFO kanalu, mjestu gdje istina ponekad zvuči čudnije od fikcije. Vidimo se uskoro opet. Lijep pozdrav.